I often find myself saying that something is one of the most profound or most beautiful contradictions in each one. And it occurred to me today that all of those contradictions are profound because they all challenge us to think about ourselves and our world differently. And that's the whole point. The Ichuan method is designed to break the mould. But it certainly is a profound and beautiful contradiction that Ichuan's reverse method is a return to infancy, by which I mean that the first profound act of socialised intent that we perform in normal, average human development is just to stand unaided. And it's not a coincidence that that's where we begin again in Ichuan training. In the journey from standing up for the first time as infants to becoming who we are, we gain abilities and knowledge that are incredibly precious. It's not easy to exist physically and then to master movement to the precise degree required to function in a human society. It's another profound insight of the reverse method that while so many people are desperate to add the meaningless title master or shifu to their name, as if that can compensate for the crippling alienation felt by everyone on some level in society, everyone is already a master. Being a master is what it means to have achieved excellence at being ordinary. It takes enormous effort to be normal, and most of that effort isn't even ours, by the way, it's society's. Society invests vast resources in forming its members' intents into physical vessels so that we don't just know our place, we know our shape, our physical posture. The genius of the Ichuan method isn't to make people extraordinary, it's to provide rehabilitation to build people back up just to being ordinary, just to possessing or being able to access more of our innate potential. Master is the title that we should give to ordinary people who mastered what society taught them in terms of how to physically move. It's like there was an idea in ancient Greece called proskinesis, and it means, in this sense, the way that a beaten dog moves, and that was the way that a slave was supposed to move. Even if they didn't naturally move like that, they had to move like that, otherwise it was disrespectful to their masters. And this is in part what Wang Shangjai means by people's innate physical ability is socially repressed by socialization. Taught to move like a beaten dog, and then you can indeed call yourself a master, because that's not easy to achieve. It's incredibly difficult to escape from. So what do? Well, in Ichuan, we return to infancy. We start again with that moment of just standing unaided. It's a full circle, and the journey's going to begin again, only this time we have knowledge and we have culture and we have theory, and so this time we won't end up like a beaten dog, the masters of being a beaten dog. I'm fascinated in passing, which I think is very much a thing in the internet age, by these people who say, when you practice Chinese martial arts, don't think. Thinking about things will just be a barrier to the purity of intent, etc. Just train as hard as you possibly can, do what your teacher says, blah blah blah, become a beaten dog all over again. This was never Wang Shangjai's teaching, but more than that, I can't think of a single good motive that someone could possibly have in telling you not to think about what they're suggesting that you should do with your body. And let's not forget that don't think is also a theory, and like all theories, we should stop and consider what it's achieved. So all of those people in the Chinese martial arts discussion space who talk like that, what have they actually achieved? The point of theory is to help people progress, to leapfrog their progression by avoiding the mistakes of others. That's how human societies have always progressed. It's how human social organisation functions. People don't keep eating the same poisoned mushrooms. The knowledge gets passed on. I'll come to that another time in another discussion, but today I want to think about the main theory that comes to us from Wang Xiangzhai, and this isn't Zhanzhuang. Zhanzhuang's an ancient practice. The theory that comes to us from Wang Xiangzhai is that society trained our intent, and this then manifests itself in retarded physical potential. Our intent has innate potential, and note that this isn't the same thing as innate ability. I know that everyone, including me, uses these as synonyms at times, but being absolutely specific, potential implies that something could become something else with effort. Not that, say, if you gain whole body unified force, you'll also access some store of technical fight skill. Even tigers play fights to improve their skills. And I'll tell you something in passing, it's a lot easier to help someone unfold their understanding of I Chuan if they have absolutely no background in Chinese martial arts than if they do. People who have a background in I Chuan or Chinese martial arts have been so caught up in the negative dharma that's promoted on the internet that a huge amount of the work that has to go into their training is just breaking down the nonsense. That's a terrible crying shame that holds back and retards the development of the whole social movement of I Chuan. In any case, the idea is that we go back to the infancy of will and learn to stand again. This is how we begin to challenge the socialized repression of our intent. And to get to that point where potentially we could do that, it would be an act of unbelievable folly just to do the same thing again. I mean, it's incredibly easy, isn't it, just to get caught up in something where it seems quite exotic, it seems so different from your normal world, and then before you know it, you realise it's just the same thing in disguise. And I think that happens a lot in Chinese martial arts. People feel frightened and powerless. Like Wang Xiangzhai student Zhao Daoxin says, people who are attracted to Chinese martial arts very often are more afraid of violence than ordinary people. And I think that's a really good insight. And I think we can extend that to people who feel more, whatever words we want to put on it, because we all feel it in a modern society. I mean, I'm talking as a professional sociologist, but that sense of alienation, anomie, powerlessness in the face of, an enormously powerful social, political and economic system, and you create a fantasy world. And I'm not just talking about the so-called woo-woo magic power stuff by any means. We all do it because it's one of the points of Wushu that we can create an alternative world, but there's a positive way and a negative way of doing that. The positive way is the real path of Wushu, and the negative way is, I don't know. We know the kind of thing. It's not what I want to talk about today. The point is that we go back to infancy, we learn to stand again, and this time we try our best not to make the same mistakes. This time we're going to take active control of our development. And there are lots of ways of doing that, and you don't have to listen to any particular theory. But remember that intuitive development can take many forms, and it's highly dependent on the theory that you've got to start with. Do you want to be like the first person who invented standing? Or let's say more accurately, do you want to be like the person who was the student of the first person who invented standing? So across 2 generations, they spend their entire lives just threshing out the basics. And that's just as much intuitive progression. It's just as much an enormous achievement as is building on a mass of pre-research theory that allows you to exponentially leapfrog forward. I've said before, this is the idea of positive dharma. So remember, both those things are intuitive growth. Starting from scratch, completely inventing from scratch the idea of standing. There must have been at one point some person who just initially invented the very first thing, had the first inkling, and it would have taken them a lifetime just to build that up into some basic ideas around standing. Look at Wang Xiangjia himself. It takes a lifetime to work through and escape from, as Yao Zongzun says, escape from the old-fashioned thinking of Guo Yunshen and the previous generations of Wushu masters. Everything that he explored or developed theoretically, we can just read in a day. And that's astonishing when you think about it. I'm not saying understand it necessarily exactly, but a lifetime of research can be explained to someone else in a day. So don't fetishize the idea of intuitive progression. Remember that intuition can be educated, and the more educated it is, the more effective it is. And last video, we started unfolding around the idea of balanced, unified, whole body force. And I'm assuming a person who is able to stand for around 30 minutes and who is familiar with the basics outlined in the beginner's course. It's what I would consider intermediate level, and yet we're starting again. We're just standing up. But why? Well, this is how a holistic system should function. Constantly circling back to the basics, understanding them on a deeper level. As Yao Zongzun says, just mindlessly increasing the volume of your basics has a very limited return on investment. It's not good sports science. You reach what we call the 95% point, which means that to get 5% better by doing the same thing is virtually impossible. So you have to shift either your practice or your understanding. And we've got plenty of time to discuss balanced whole body unified force over the next few videos. So for now, let's upgrade our understanding around some basics, starting with standing does not give you whole body unified force. That's just something we say to beginners because the reality is initially a little bit abstract, or it's something that beginners, even what I call long-standing beginners, tend to believe because they think of unified force as something that happens in the physical body. I saw someone on the internet describing this as thinking that the issue is meat, i.e. that standing causes some kind of fundamental changes to muscles, the fascia, the tendons, bone marrow even, generating some sort of enhanced physiology, and that's the source of what makes each one function. And I thought that was a great way to describe it, focusing on meat or thinking the issue is meat. But unfortunately, this person then said that the real issue is the development of qi. Well, actually, in traditional Chinese medicine, qi is just as much part of the meat of a human being as blood and bones. It's very much a modern concept to see qi as some sort of exotic force. The issue is none of these things, and assuming that qi is real, it's still there when we fall asleep, for example. Muscles, bones, tendons, fascia, all of these things remain when we fall asleep. But if we fall asleep while we're stood up, we fall down, because then something significant has gone, or at least retreated significantly, and that's our intent. Intent, or if we like, will, is what permits the infant to stand for the first time and then keeps us standing. It acts like programming to control the balance of tension and relaxation throughout the body, and also a lot of other things like alignment, relative balance, and even breathing and the beating of the heart if we take it to the finest grain. The clue was always in the name, each one. Whole body unified force exists in the intent as programming. Most people in each one discussion spaces know this as the idea that mind is force, but from the incredibly vague descriptions and indeed arguments that usually circle around this idea, it's clear that this very simple concept is profoundly misunderstood. It's not telekinesis. In fact, in theory, you could just have unified force if you could just instantly change your programming, but it's not that easy because the old programming is so ingrained and so well defended. The actual mechanism that causes the emergence of whole body unified force is mental induction, and we'll upgrade our understanding of that in coming videos. Standing pole postures are just molds that we use to help the programming understand what it is that we want it to do. The thing itself, i.e. whole body unified force, exists in, or more accurately, as intent in its truest sense, just in precisely the same way that dance moves do, or anything that we could do with our body. It's just that whole body unified force is, we might say, a step prior to that because it's about the quality of our movement itself. All metaphors are problematic, and this one causes us to think of mind and body as separate, which isn't really what we want in each one. Well, we can say that eventually, as the programming, if we want to use that phrase, as it's rewritten line by line, word by word over months of training, we ultimately experience intent as a bodily phenomenon, as the whole body becomes full of intent, and this is what we call the intentional body. But that's another day's topic. For now, we can say that to hack that programming, we have to get past the anti-hacking devices that were installed when we were trained to move by society. In this sense, our intent is an agent of another much bigger will. We never want to fully lose that because without socialization, we'd just be animals, but we do want to hack it and tweak it with some upgraded code. The first line of defense of our pre-existing programming is what we might call a kind of body deafness. It's not a nefarious social conspiracy that we have this, it's just that societies are judicious in how they distribute resources. On average, the population of any society will exploit just as much of its physical potential as that society needs it to. On average, it will need some people to specialise in ways that require more exploitation of physical potential and others to exploit less, just like if top quality education was required for every child, then we'd have it, but it isn't, so we don't. Body deafness means an inability to use our whole structure efficiently when we ask it to. It can't respond. We usually don't, so we don't notice that we have this condition. It's perfectly sufficient for most social purposes to use isolated muscles to perform a task, and that could be driving, talking, sitting at a desk, or really anything. Other muscles atrophy and experience a diminished connection to intent, so we often can't even use them effectively individually, just for sheer weight bearing even, never mind link them together into a sophisticated holistic framework. And when we ask our bodies to do this, they just can't hear us. It's like there's nothing there to receive the command. It's very much the same issue with Yiquan vibration skill, which, as I've said before, I couldn't do at first. It was as if there was literally nothing to receive the command to do it in my hands and my arms. It was just a command in my will, but then little by little parts of my fingers and then my hands and arms and so on began to receive the command and respond to it. There was something there that could receive it. I just couldn't connect to it at first. And I literally didn't believe that it was possible to that degree. I mean, my coach could do it to some degree, but not to that degree. I couldn't believe it until I did it. And by the way, knowing that it can be done also helps your body hear the command, because once my senior student saw me do that, he started to work on it and he made much faster progress than I did. Body deafness is a profound line of defense for our social programming, so we have to hack it in some way. There are a few ways of doing that, but the most effective, because it's the most blunt and unnuanced, is just to work on relaxation. Excess tension is something that we can just let go of, even though it's tougher to do that in practice than just saying it. But that means it's easier than getting the body to do something new, like a new task, like, for example, vibration skill, or even something like Qi Li. And we need to remove excess tension anyway, because this is a prerequisite for making mental induction work. Mental induction functions at a particularly fine level of bodily interaction with intent. If there is excess tension, the effect is just obliterated. In fact, mental induction partly helps to push the release of excess tension, but it's also necessary to have a much less nuanced prior stage of working on relaxation directly. And that's what we started with in the last video. But as we've been standing for a while now, taking it to the next level requires a lot less time than it did to get this far. And the importance of what I'm discussing today is really just to begin to unfold into this deeper, contradictory understanding of what standing actually is, and the real nature of whole body unified force, and indeed why Yiquan is called Yiquan and not Xing Yiquan. And that's something to ponder, the shift from one name to the other. I'll come back to that another time and we can go deeper into that, but for now, just think about this idea that whole body unified force isn't actually real. It's not real, that is, in the sense of it's not about the meat. It's real in the sense that it's intent, in the way that intent and will are real, but it's not real in a physical sense. It's just the programming. Meanwhile, we're continuing on with our current physical tasks, and the goal of those is to help push our understanding through physical knowledge into recognizing and experiencing and using balanced whole body unified force. And in the next video, we'll get back to that.